tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ko Lesley Ferkins tōku ingoa. A big warm welcome to this panel discussion, this panel talanoa, this panel kōrero here today, and I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panellists before we move into some of those very key questions that I'm sure we are very interested in hearing about their fantastic experiences. So Dan Plews, Storey and Mark Orams. As I said, for those of you that don't know, my name is Lesley Ferkins and I'm the Director of SPRINZ, the Sports Performance Research Institute based up in AUT Millennium. And our guys here are very much connected to the Sports Performance Research Institute through the research mahi that they do. And as you're going to hear, much of their research mahi is very applied and is born out in the practice work that we're going to be experiencing. What I thought I would do, instead of trying to bring out their stories initially through the talanoa or through the conversational kōrero, I was thinking there's so much that they've packed in terms of their bios that I'm gonna do a bit of a read of their bios so that we can get that real overview and glimpse of the experiences that they have had and that they are bringing to us. So Dr. Dan Plews, first up, makes it feel, I'm sure, pretty awkward as we read out his bio, but you can kind of relive your experiences as I read it out. So Dan Plews, he describes himself as an applied sports scientist. He's a researcher, and he also describes himself as a coach. But as a sports scientist, and particularly in the area of physiology, Dan has worked closely with athletes who have won more than 25 world and Olympic titles in rowing, kayaking and triathlon. As a researcher, Dan completed his PhD at AUT with our very own Andy Kilding up the back there, or up the front here, there he is, focusing on applied heart rate variability, HRV, and training adaptation in elite athletes. But since then, and get this, this is where you're going to make that connection between the names and the articles that you might have come across. He's been involved in 50 peer-reviewed journal articles from his PhD in the research mahi that he's been doing, as well as all the other stuff, which includes leading the performance physiology for women's canoe racing New Zealand, and he's also founded his own company, Endure IQ. So Dan is seriously passionate about endurance sport. And he's competed in Ironman, particularly Ironman, and he's coached 3 athletes under 8-hour barrier in the Ironman. He lives and breathes it. He's a competitive Ironman athlete himself. In fact, he does lots of experiments on himself, I've heard as well. In 2018, he broke the amateur course record at the Ironman World Champs in Kona, Hawaii. That really hard one, 8 hours 24, and he won the overall amateur division by more than 10 minutes. He placed 22nd overall, so he's some machine himself as well as training others. He thrives on continuous learning, being on the cutting edge of applied sports science. He often throws himself into the depths of new science measurement and self-quantification to find out firsthand some of the things that he needs to know before he tries it out on other people. So importantly for the occasion today, Dan is a research fellow at AUT Sports Performance Research Institute. We're incredibly proud of him and appreciative of the mahi that he does with us. And again, for the purposes of today's panel, he was the head of physical performance for ETNZ, Emirates Team New Zealand. And of course, as we all know, what happened in terms of that winning campaign in 2021. So a huge welcome to you, Dan. It's just fantastic to have you on board with us and to hear your story. So I'm going to ask you an opening question. And that opening question is, in our bio, in the advertising for today's event, there's obviously lots of students that have got lots of assignments on at the moment, so hence they're perhaps not able to be here. But in the advertising, we talked about, you've been involved in the high performance training environment for a very long time, and at the very highest level on the international stage. But we talked about the America's Cup campaign being an exceptional experience for you. Can you just tell us a bit about those exceptional moments for you?
Yeah, I guess I've been involved in more of the Olympic-based sports. Primarily rowing. I went to the London and the Rio Olympics with the New Zealand rowing team. And when you take the America's Cup for New Zealand is a completely different beast, and it's a whole nation is behind it. Whereas with rowing, at least, it was a little bit more insular, a little bit smaller. And also with Team New Zealand, you really felt like you were part of an actual team who was a real integral cog in that overall team. And I think that to me was what made it much more special than anything I've ever experienced, because you could see it was almost touching a nation. It was helping a nation, or a whole nation was behind it, and that was the main difference. Whereas, you know, you can do your little part helping someone win an Olympic gold medal, but it's kind of individualised, and as it should be. But I think what the really nice thing, and Emirates Team New Zealand did a great job of that, is it's very all-inclusive. So I think that were the main differences for me.
Awesome. And we watched every step of the way, and with you being very excited. I'm going to move on to Adam and ask him a similar question. Once again, just to sort of pack in all of the things that they have done and are doing, that connect their research with their practice, and help to create the education platform that we have here at AUT and at Springs and in the School of Sport and Rec. So Dr. Adam Storey has a specialist background in S&C, strength and power conditioning, which has enabled him to work across several sports, including weightlifting, track and field, and rugby. Adam has worked in high pressure and complex environments, Super Rugby and Sports Science Manager and Assistant Training at the Plews, and this experience led to him taking on the role as Head of Physical Performance for Manu Samoa in 2019 at the Rugby World Cup, which he tells me was a great training ground for the Tokyo Olympics that are coming up, which he is going to be involved in soon. Since 2008, Adam has coached and managed various New Zealand weightlifting teams and at key political events, including 2012, that was the London Olympics, and the 2016 Rio Olympics, and the 2010, which was in Delhi, and the 2014 Glasgow Com Games. So during this time, Adam coached weightlifters to Com Games medals, and his athletes have broken over 250 official New Zealand records in competition. It was really cool reading these bios, researching these bios for you guys. It's just phenomenal work that you've been doing. Adam is currently the national lead of strength and conditioning for Canoe Racing New Zealand. So these guys work pretty closely together on a number of different areas, where he has the privilege of working with several world-class athletes, including our recent athlete of the decade, Lisa Carrington, of course, canoe sprint. Adam is Senior Research Fellow with us at AUT Springs and in the School of Sport and Rec, and like Dan, supervises a number of our postgrad students in strength, particularly for Adam in strength conditioning and also in ex-phys. And again, finally and importantly for today's exercise, Adam was the lead strength conditioning specialist for ETNZ Emirates Team New Zealand during the campaign. So a huge welcome to you, Adam. Thank you for coming along, and thank you for all the mahi that you do and the connection that you have with us. It's pretty special. So once again, tell us about the exceptional moments that you can recall from your experience with the America's Cup campaign.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me personally, like the America's Cup was just one of those childhood dreams. Like, I mean, I can remember as a kid just watching so many of the campaigns, and just for me, I've always had a big fascination with sports, and I guess just something I started as a child was to collect, newspaper articles of just really cool sporting moments. I mean, I've actually still got the original newspaper from the 1995 win and the 2000 win that were in Auckland as well. So, when I was a kid collecting those newspapers, I never ever dreamed or thought about potentially being involved in a cup campaign, let alone one that was in New Zealand and in Auckland again. So for me, that was definitely a phenomenal experience, very surreal, and similar to what Dan mentioned around being involved in Olympic-based campaigns. They can be very, very high pressure, very exciting. But I guess what we were able to get out of the Team New Zealand campaign was something really special, and even just asking some of the guys that were in the team who were either current Olympians or previous or past Olympians, how did this experience stack up to what you've experienced in the past? And they just said, hands down, what we experienced in Auckland, you just can't replicate. To win overseas is one thing. It's great, you can celebrate that with your family back home, but when you've got a whole nation, as Dan mentioned, it literally felt like the whole nation was behind us. I think it was something pretty unique for us.
Yeah, incredibly special. And of course, Mark's had a few experiences in that regard too, with several America's Cup campaigns under his belt, including hosting and defending and losing. Do we mention that? In Auckland with the team of 5 million, or might have been 4 million at that point, behind you. And Mark, a similar question for you, but just to sort of tease out some of the things that you might not know about Mark, for some people anyway. Of course, Mark's our current or interim dean for the faculty, and his other day job is he is Dean of the Graduate School, the Research Graduate School. But Mark has, of course, been very involved in sailing, and during the America's Cup campaign in 2021, he was heavily involved in the media commentary as part of an expert commentator there. But for the purpose of today's conversation, I'm just going to highlight a few things about Mark's sailing background, and it will be fair to say he is a pretty accomplished yachtsman in his own right, with 12 New Zealand titles over a range of different yachting classes. He was New Zealand Yachtsman of the Year as part of Steinlager 2 crew, which won the 89-90 Whitbread Round the World Yacht Race. He was a member of Team New Zealand crew that successfully defended the America's Cup in 2000, that was in Auckland, and he also took part in 03, which was the defence of the Cup. In 99, 05 and 08, he was the Laser Radio Masters World Champion. So as I said, Mark was quite heavily involved, in fact not just this campaign, of course the other America's Cup campaigns previously, in a lot of the media commentary and doing us proud, AUT, proud on the airways, both visually and audio. So Mark, you've got the benefit of sort of a longer horizon of experiences. You are the old guy on the front. So just reflect on it for us in terms of what really stood out for you as exceptional moments of this campaign, and why might that be the case?
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks for the introduction, Lesley. It does remind me, I did realise that I had moved into the elder statesman category, if I might put it that way, a few years ago now, when I was competing in a national championship and in a pretty aggressive interaction on the start line. A young guy next to me on the start line trying to force me over the line yelled out to me, "Get out of the way, you old bastard!" And I thought, who's he talking about? And then I suddenly realised it was me. So, yeah, you did right. Yachting was a sport I fell in love with as a child, and that was last century. And so I've had a long history in the sport that captured me as a youngster. So for me, the most exceptional part of this campaign was just understanding the legacy that led to this success. And that legacy includes, of course, not just success, but some pretty hard failures as well. As you pointed out, I had the privilege of being involved with the defence in 2000, where we were the first country outside of the United States to successfully defend the America's Cup. And not only that, we won 5-0, so undefeated. And 3 short years later, I was also involved in the team that lost the Cup 5-0. So to go from hero to zero like that in such a short period of time, and for those of you who recall how that happened as well, it wasn't just a case of kind of getting it right and then getting it wrong. It was the controversy and the interaction with New Zealand moving to a professional sports kind of environment in the sport of sailing that resulted in all of our talent being poached by a country called Switzerland, led by a billionaire, and then led on the water by the skipper who'd actually led us 3 years earlier. So all of that stuff was matched up in there. Then we went through the dramas of the near misses in Valencia and the even nearer miss in San Francisco, and the success of Bermuda, and then the chance to defend it here in a new class. So my reflections on the highlight for me was really the context of all of that heritage and history, some of which I've been privileged to be involved with, and now on the outside kind of looking in and seeing that heritage play out in such an amazing event and such a great result. And just want to pay tribute to my 2 colleagues here as members of that team and their contribution to that.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, Mahi. So just while we're kind of getting that sense of the time horizon and your involvement over that, can you give us a bit of a glimpse of your thinking around what might be happening next and what might be good and what might be less good, just perhaps from your own personal point of view?
Oh, well, I'm purely speculating and guessing on this. These guys will have a better idea. They've been in the team. And one of the things when you're inside the team, of course, because it is such an important IP game, if you like, because a big part of competitive advantage is not just being fitter and stronger and faster, it's having the right equipment that's going to have a competitive advantage over the others. And so keeping your gains that you're making through your R&D, whether that be in the physical conditioning side or whether that be in the technology side of the boat you're designing, or the sails, or the foils, or the whole other multitude of decisions that you make within a team to be successful in that environment. You do keep a lot of that in-house. So I just preface my speculation with saying I'm coming from a position of ignorance with regard to that. But it seems to me that what we're heading towards is potentially a new type of approach to the America's Cup, where we may see Team New Zealand with the challenger of record from the Royal Yacht Squadron in the UK, so Team Ineos UK, make a decision to have a combination of events where the next America's Cup is potentially hosted in the UK with a guarantee that the subsequent America's Cup, irrespective of who wins, comes to Auckland in the summer of 23-24. Now, if that does occur, it will be because of primarily financial reasons. What we must avoid is what happened in 2000-2003. It's very clear what international teams can do to be successful and win the America's Cup, and that is poach the best talent that Team New Zealand has. It worked in 2000 to 2003, and it can work again, because if you get the talent from the defender, you get not only that talent, but you weaken them as well. You also get the IP, and so you suddenly advance from where you are to here, and you weaken your opponent. So that's a real risk, and to fight that risk, you can only rely on national loyalty for so long. People have got families to feed, they've got futures to look forward to, and in a professional sporting environment, you'd ask yourself, if you were dangled a massive financial check in front of you, would you say no just because you felt, well, I'm a loyal Kiwi and I want to stay true to keeping the cup here? So that's a long-winded way of saying that I think what the signals that I'm reading is that the partnership with Ineos may result in a combo where we give up the rights to host the next America's Cup in Auckland, to host it in the UK, and the basis for a significant investment in Emirates Team New Zealand, which will allow them to retain the talent to be competitive. We'd back ourselves to win the Cup against Ineos in a one-off Challenge Defender Series in the UK, and then the subsequent Cup would be an all challenges and single defender event in Auckland. Whether Emirates Team New Zealand is the defender or one of many challenges would depend on the outcome of the Portsmouth event. So, as I say, speculation, but that's how I read it.
Yep. No, super interesting. And again, it's pretty cool that we've got in this room the IP of a time horizon over, decades of involvement in sailing and America's Cup campaigns. So for you guys, Adam and Dan, have you got any speculations? Are you able to offer us any sense of insight around what's happening for you in terms of the ETNZ involvement going forward, or is that sort of something you can't speak about, or you just give your own hunches on that?
Well, I guess we don't really, from what Mark said, we don't really know anymore. That's kind of what we think as well. So, but like when the America's Cup was unlike anything you've ever experienced, in that when it finished on I think it was on the Wednesday, we had like Thursday off, Friday we went in and we had a bit of a hoo-ha. The Prime Minister came around and then that was it. Done. This is the first time I put my uniform back on. So so it's kind of weird. But then I think at this period now, we're getting into like what's happening, because we don't really know once everything's announced, which I believe is going to be in around July, and then they'll start rallying everything back together, all the IP, all the manpower, all the people who were there before. So
nice. Okay, so we're just gonna you had something else to say on that?
I was just going to say, it's a tricky situation. Like closing day at Team New Zealand, Grant Dalton mentioned to the team that in order to run a campaign, you're looking at a $100 million plus price tag. So there's a lot of factors that need to be sort of put on the table to make that even just financially viable to get it off the ground. So it's one thing that he definitely made clear, and we wholeheartedly understand and believe that it's not about the money, it's about just making sure we can actually get a good viable campaign to represent New Zealand again. So it's not about the dollars, it's about just putting in a good defence.
And he specifically said, just as Mark said, is that it's all about maintaining the core people who are doing the key jobs at ETNZ as well.
So, just sort of staying with that theme of time horizons, we're going to skip back now to, I'm sure this is a question that's on many people in the room. And by the way, I'll come to room questions in a moment. So, think of some things that you're keen to hear about. So, how did you get into this, Adam and Dan? You are working, you start off as an undergraduate student, like someone in the room. You then go and do your masters. Dan, you've come from the UK and you've done a lot of your study over there. You then obviously have to, step into the PhD context in terms of really creating that research basis for the expertise that you then are giving out. But how then did you get into connecting up with high performance Olympic Commonwealth Games and then in the end the Team New Zealand, which I don't know, is it the pinnacle of your careers? Where are you going after this? The question on the table is, how did you get into it? Do you want to go, Adam, first?
Yeah, well, fascinating. So I guess when I think back, I've always been, as I mentioned at the start, very fascinated with high performance sport, and I guess from high school days I knew I either wanted to be an athlete or involved in high performance sport in some capacity. So I guess that's always been a massive driving force for me. The passion has always been primarily Olympic-based campaigns. Again, like I can recall watching all these previous Olympic Games from 1988 and 1984, and just so fascinated with how these athletes were able to train and compete at this level. So that's where my heart was initially, and I guess that formed the basis of my research as well. My research for my PhD was around how weightlifters are able to adapt to their training schedule. So again, it was very, very practical in the sense that it was going to help me as a coach to be better, to be able to prescribe things moving forward. So yeah, been very fortunate to be blessed with a lot of good work experiences, and then it was actually Plews came to me one day with an offer I couldn't refuse. He was after a strength and conditioning partner in crime, so it was quite fascinating at the time. I was interviewing for a very good role with Team GB over in the UK, so I guess I was battling a lot of internal demons in the sense that I'm very, very loyal in terms of being a Kiwi, and I haven't represented any other country apart from New Samoa. It was the first time I've jumped ship. But so I guess I was sort of toying up this opportunity to work with Team GB for their Olympic campaign, which was going to be really exciting. And then, as I said, Dan came along, and I remember that closing thing he said to me after we met. He said, "I hope you don't get that job." That was a bit of a didn't really know how to take that, but no, really worked out. Really worked out awesome. I wouldn't change anything. Like it's a real once in a lifetime experience to be able to do that, especially at home.
Yeah. So he ended up being your boss. Is that how it works?
He's a hard boss.
I guess it was quite a line. I mean, the way it works is I led the training program, the overall periodization, like anything that was done in terms of the grinding, like all the intervals, endurance-based stuff. I would run. I'd kind of look at the overall plan and move sessions around based on the cell, and then Adam would take over and make sure every single gym session was as it needed to be based on what we talked about. So, yeah.
So you kind of got him into it, sort of.
Yeah.
How did you get into it?
Well, from the start. Yeah. So I guess like Adam, I was a forever athlete. I was in the British triathlon team, and like I said to you in an email today, I was at Loughborough University, but I was a terrible student, like a really bad student. Just obsessed with training all the time. I just trained triathlon continuously. Never went to any lectures. Really bad. Probably don't want to hear this. And somehow I got a scholarship to do a master's at Leeds at the time, which was with the British Triathlon Federation, and it was more primarily due to my athletic prowess than my academic prowess, because I was a reasonably good athlete and I managed to wangle my way in. But then I kind of made that transition in my mindset to being very focused on training and sport to kind of more in my academic work, and then kind of I went off on this academic path. And and at the time when I was at Leeds, it was at the time when Alistair Brownlee was there as well, who was double Olympic gold medalist. So, and even he was a junior at the time, but it kind of was at the start of this being involved in many great, amazing athletes and talent. Left there, I moved to Singapore, did coaching there for a while, met Andy actually, one time ago when there was a collaboration between AUT and the Singapore Sports Council, so that was kind of how I got this interaction. And then I worked for the Singapore Sports Council as a physiologist, moved from there to New Zealand to do a PhD as a scholarship with High Performance Sport in New Zealand. And after about 3 months, I just put a house, and then I got offered to go to Karapira and work with the rowing team. So I spent pretty much 8 years going back and forth, Cambridge, Auckland. So yeah, that's how I kind of got into it. And then I was, you did a good job at rowing, and then it kind of just spirals, right? And the reason I got the opportunity with Emirates Team New Zealand is because I decided doing some work with women's kayak, and it was Gordon Walker, who's the coach for the women's kayak team, who put in the good word with Blair Tuke, who led the sailing team. So that's how all that came about. So it's it's kind of just you open the door and walk through it, as they say.
And you seem to me to be, on the face of it, it seems very connected in terms of your research work. You're publishing constantly, clearly, and the practice work that you do. And you sort of you've described yourself in those three spaces of coach, sports scientist, and researcher, Dan. But can you maybe describe for us or exemplify any kind of really specific overlaps between your work with Emirates Team New Zealand and the campaign and physical performance and the research spaces that you inhabit?
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of work in heart rate variability and specifically monitoring. So so when I was with the rowing team, I did a lot with heart rate variability, but it was kind of a different beast when you're kind of going from these endurance-based athletes who are very methodical, very routine, and then the sailing was they're not really into the training as much. It's so we actually ended up throwing the HRV completely out the window because we couldn't actually get them to take it on any regular basis, well, the majority of the team. But there's always, I think one of the most challenging things about the role was you had to really understand training, because I could be changing training at 7:30 at night based on the weather the next day. So knowing what's happening and the key requisites of what they need to do on the water, what they need to do in training was really important. So having a good understanding through research of the determinants of what they have to do, what training will affect different areas of physiology to help them get the best out of themselves was kind of was really helpful. So there's always, it's not always your own research, it's just actually being up to date with that. And I think being at AUT and having great students, my students are the people who keep me the most up to date most of the time. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're going to play a short video now, a couple of minutes I believe, which kind of gets us into some of the specifics of the grinding program and the physical performance program that we went through with the sailors. And then I'm going to throw it open to some questions from the audience, and get as specific or as general as you want in terms of the curiosities around what you really want to hear from these guys thereafter.
Come from rowing, got people who come from cycling, guys who are in the last campaign, some newbies, some people who are on the team. So it's quite the mix, but I think everyone gets on pretty well, and so far it's a really good team atmosphere. You definitely want to go sailing. There's only so much you can do on a grinder inside. It can get quite monotonous, quite boring, but they've definitely got their heads into it, and they've really picked up the game in terms of the training, and now they're definitely excited. They put all that practice into good use on the water.
Okay, questions from the audience. Volunteers before I start picking on people. Yeah, go.
I'll start off. Adam, looking at the previous Olympic athlete that you had in the crew there that was formerly a swimmer, then kayaker, was there much of a change to mould him and what you need to do with your S&C side of work?
Good question, Kev. And funnily enough, there's actually we found there's quite a bit of transference from Steve's kayaking model and technique to actually what the guys needed on the grinding pedestal. So even though Steve was definitely a newbie in terms of being part of a sailing team, we actually got Steve to help critique some of the grinders in terms of their technique to make sure that they weren't just blowing out their arms. So again, in kayak, it's quite a misconception that you just use your arms, it's all about the arms, where in actual fact, like the leg drive, the power is generated from the pretty much lower body and core, and the arms will follow through. So Steve was just trying to get that kind of concept across to some of the guys as well, who are finding that basically they were just fatiguing their smaller muscle groups. So yeah, it was actually quite a good crossover we found.
Good question. I had that one too. Very interesting. Thanks, Kev. Other questions, specific or general in nature? Before I start picking on people, Chris.
I knew you were going to pick on me, Leslie.
Yeah.
But I had a question. Gents, I don't think I've ever seen you out sailing. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I just wonder, like going into a sport that maybe you didn't know so well, do you do any sort of special preparation leading in?
Yeah, you've never sailed, no. Correct. I have been on the chase boat, if that counts for anything. But I got seasick, so. I think with any sport, and I think anyone going into anything new, and when I first started rowing, I didn't really know anything about that either. Even kayak, I didn't really know anything about that. My history has always been swim, bike, run. So I think you have to kind of do your due diligence and just have a moment of time where you just kind of learn and just do nothing almost. So, and just speak to other people, learn a bit about the sport, try and understand the key determinants of that event. And I think what was quite cool about the grinding was, I've had this background in cycling and I have this background in kayaking, and it was kind of this mixture of the two, which was quite nice. So you could still use power and RPM from the cycling, but with lots of the technical aspects of the kayaking and the kind of the training program were all in there. So I ended up kind of being this mix, and it worked really well. But for the first period, I was doing a lot of talking to the sailors about how they feel the event will unfold, because it was actually quite stochastic in nature. It's a periods of very high intensity bursts and then kind of periods of lower recovery. So it was cool, that's kind of how we molded the training program to make sure that all those key determinants of how to be a good grinder were covered across the training program. And it's quite, as a sport, it's actually got a lot of different physiological things you have to consider. So, yeah.
I think, and even tagging onto that, it's one thing to get your head around, physical and physiological demands in the sport. But I guess other thing that we had to get our heads around was the actual cultural demands of that environment as well. Because first and foremost, as it should be, the sailing schedule took precedence over everything, and the design team were just so driven in creating the fastest boat possible. So at times our training was severely compromised for the sake of the design team wanting to trial do new things on the boat, for example. So again, that was a massive learning experience for Dan and I to just be immersed in that.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting because I think in the sports that me and Adam have been involved in, training's first and foremost the most important thing, but there it's it's pretty low down in the pecking order in terms of the priority of what's important and what's not, which is completely understandable, because if you have a fast boat, no matter how fit you are, you're not gonna, it's not really going to go anywhere.
Nice, interesting. Other thoughts, Skate?
Well, nice to see you guys. I was just thinking around the range of conditions you had to try and prepare the athletes for, and obviously we didn't see the boats at the really top end. What was probably physically the most demanding part of the racing? Was it that day when they were just off the foils?
Yeah.
Or was it out of there? How hard was it?
Yeah. So the way it works is that it kind of goes. It's really hard in light winds for the grinders. It's not very hard in moderate winds, and then it gets really, really hard in high winds again. So they had a lot of hard days. And when that day where they were dropping on and off the foils all day, they were really spent. Yeah. So those days are really, really hard. And I do think, it's always hard to know how much the fitness is really playing a key part in what the overall success. But I believe that that day in particular was the day where they came to it, and I think that second race really made a difference. And I do think the fitness played into account, because they could make more manoeuvres, more changes based on because they could apply the power to the boat that much more readily.
Yeah, it was interesting. Still vividly remember that day, because Dan and I had to basically set up the recovery protocols. So as soon as the guys off the water, they jumped into their recovery, and they, on that day they came off the foils. As Dan said, they were spent. They were saying that's the hardest thing we've done. But then the following race, when they had basically a big tackling duel with Lern Rossum, that pretty much topped that day. Every time there's a manoeuvre, the work output required from the lads on the pedestals just goes through the roof. So that one was the pinnacle in terms of output. They were crushed that day. Yeah.
Go, Mark.
I've got a question about that. So, who made the call to change out grinders between races? Nobody wants to get taken off the boat, right? Was that your call, or was that call made on the boat, or?
No, it's all.
I think it was pre-made, really. We kind of, I mean, Blair made that call, but we'd also decided that one grinder was going to stay on the whole time. So, and it was based on Blair was making that call based on more on the conditions, it was Blair who was making that call.
And we've done like a series of back-to-back tests, so we could see the fatigability profile of the grinders as well. So again, like Blair knew guys that would be pretty tanked after one race, and we're about to back it up, or guys that could basically back up too. So
we specifically actually tested that. We did it on that. We set up a watt bike with basically grinder handles, and we simulated 2 races. We made them do back-to-back 20 minutes apart. So the drop-off wasn't actually as much as you think it would be.
So obviously, because Josh Jr. and Andy Maloney had flight control and other roles during manoeuvres, and they were grinding as well, so those guys weren't an option to change out. So you really had limited options. Yeah? Who was the guy who stayed on all the time? And how did you determine who that was?
He was the strongest guy. Yeah.
Are you allowed to tell us who that was?
Probably not.
Well, we could look back in the footage.
You could figure it out. Yeah. It was Marius was the guy who was the guy who stayed on for everything. Yeah.
And that was just from.
And he was our strongest. Right. Well, I mean, he was he was a backwards grinder, and he was as good backwards grinding as the rest were forwards grinding. So forwards grinding is typically you do a little bit more power. So he was pretty.
That's special. Interesting. So you've got a guy there who ends up top and doing that, and he's against multiple Olympians and gold medalists and Joe Sullivan and Steve Ferguson and
he was pretty special.
Wow, it's a good Northern boy, was that right?
I think so, yeah.
So, question,
in that video, it's just showing the grinding training. What other considerations, like for overuse, the repetitive action, are you doing other training? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of work was done in the gym with Adam as well. So, I mean, they're typically on a big week they max out. I mean, if they weren't on it depends because they could be sailing a lot, and sometimes some weeks when they were sailing a lot, they could be grinding 20 hours in the week. But typically, if they weren't and it was just training, it would be between 12 and 15 hours. But they would do recovery sessions, and those recovery sessions were often optional, like in terms of the modality. So they could either cycle, or they could swim, or they could grind. Most of them didn't really run; they're not kind of built for running. But yeah, so there were those options. But also we monitored the training stress and the load all the time. So the all heart rate, we'd always monitor every time they did anything. We'd kind of get a good idea of when they're under a high load, and we could kind of move things around based on that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was such a you got a whole group of alpha males in there, so the competitive nature amongst those guys was just ruthless. So every session they were trying to throw it down against each other, and so one of our key priorities was to make sure we had an injury-free campaign, which we were very, very proud that we achieved that. So again, it would be at times having to pull guys aside and just have that conversation. Like I remember saying this to many a grinder on the team is, if I could have you at 80% fitness and strength but 100% healthy, or I could have you at 100% fitness and 100% strength but only 80% healthy, I'd always take the former. Like, I mean, if you're 100% healthy, you're always going to pick yourself up on match day or race day, but if you're the other way around, you're carrying an injury, then there's no way you're going to get the best out of yourself. So just trying to get that across their mindset was a little bit challenging at times.
Ken, another one.
So just on the strength of that, Dan, so did you set up a system that looked to qualify their training impulse so that you had a marker to use?
Yeah.
Something similar to that?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Oh, well, it was basic. I mean, it was quite a general training load score. We tested them all in the lab. We actually took them to AUT lab and we tested them all and got all kind of the individual thresholds, and then we just base it on time versus intensity pretty much for every session based on the heart rate. Yeah. So.
Yes, Julia.
How did COVID impact your training? Because it must have been this time last year you have been really pushing up to getting ready for the cup. Were you separated that whole time? Were you actually still able to train as an essential?
Yeah, we were pretty fortunate. I guess the biggest downfall is that our World Series over in Portsmouth and over in Italy got cancelled. So I mean that was a bummer for all syndicates, And so when it came time to the Challenger Series, that was the first time that we had the opportunity to race other teams. So I think if we had the World Series beforehand, the America's Cup could have been quite different moving forward. But otherwise, during level 3, we were classified as essential, which was pretty fortunate. We created a big 100-person bubble kind of thing, and we were able to train through. So, yeah.
I mean, for level 4 we were effective, but we just, we wrote the programs. The guys all took the grinders home with them and did some basic stuff at home, and they just kicked over really. So.
One of the questions, just backtracking a little bit, was as Mark alluded to, you had some Olympic athletes on board already with Olympic gold medals or medals under their belt, campaigns under their belt in different sports. What role did that mindset play into when the going got tough? Some of those things you just described. How did that play into that performance mentality and the need to lift every time when they thought they were spent?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was so special when you got a crew of 11 people. Across that 11-person man crew, you had 7 Olympic medals and 35 world titles. So it was just this, absolute amazing blend of the top of the top. So each person had different experiences that they could draw upon. As Kev mentioned, Steve Ferguson, he's a double Olympian in swimming and kayak. But then you've got someone like Joe Sullivan, who's achieved a gold medal in arguably one of the toughest events ever, that being rowing. And so yes, when it came time to doing those very painful, dark sessions, you look to someone like Joe, and he's been in that painful place so many times in his career. So it was a wealth of knowledge to almost help other guys who deal with those types of sessions as well.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, so changing tack a little bit, you've heard, I've heard a whole bunch of kind of multidisciplinary kind of examples of, the work that they've been doing and what they bring to their roles. And it exemplifies for me, what this Bachelor of Sport and Recreation is and what the AT Sports Performance Research Institute is. It's a multidiscipline research and practice institute. We have a multidiscipline degree that brings all of those areas of study to bear on developing capability in the sports sector. So my next question comes to my home base, which is SLAM, Sport Leadership and Management, and it's to Mark first. Mark brings a number of different kind of research areas. He's a researcher in the Human Potential Centre, in public health. He's a researcher in marine and environmental sciences, but he's also written a book on leadership. And in particular, one of our best, Peter Blake. So Mark, the question is around leadership, and can you just kind of plot for us, the evolution of how you have seen the Team New Zealand's over the years develop their leadership culture?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Lesley. One of the answers is related to a similar sort of question that's much more basic from sailors internationally, from world superpowers of places like the United States of America and the United Kingdom and nations that have got a lot more money. They've got corporations like Boeing or Airbus or entities like NASA, and so these are places that have access to research and development and finance and a pool of talent that is just multitudes ahead of our little island nation at the bottom of the planet. And so the question that gets asked of me quite frequently from all those people is, how the hell does New Zealand do this? How can you take on world superpowers in what is basically a technology and money game and not just win, but actually be the dominant force for 3 decades? And so, New Zealand in the modern era of the America's Cup, and I'm thinking since Australia first won it back in the early 1980s, and took it away from America, New Zealand has been the most successful nation in this high-tech game at the high end of a very technical, big money sport. How the hell does that happen? And the answer for me is around leadership and around teammateship. It's because our little island nation has the ability to put together a real special synergy, a real magic that can come from a group of people who come together who are often less experienced, perhaps arguably less talented, certainly have less resources and less background available to them. But because they're able to create this really special team environment, they're able to be successful. And a big part of that comes from the leadership of the team. And that comes also from, I think, a culture within the sport of sailing, which is not widely understood from outside, and these guys have had a taste of it now. But of course, it's been my life for most of my life and part of my heritage in whakapapa. And so most New Zealanders are not aware that New Zealand's most successful Olympic sport in terms of medals won since 1980 is sailing. Rowing and track and field are second and third equal, but they have far more events than sailing. So we've got a nation, and the sailing community in New Zealand is relatively small. I mean, in this room, there's probably 3 or 4 people who are involved in sailing and maybe 2 who are competitive. It's a small community. And it's formed this really interesting culture. But part of it's the nature of the sport that really appeals to New Zealanders. Sailing is not a sport where you have spectators, you don't go into a stadium, you don't have your parents cheering you on from the sideline, you don't have your coach at halftime giving you advice, you don't have this sort of support network around you as a child that really is in place for almost every other sport. So sailing is a sport you fall in love with, as I did as a kid, because you absolutely are captured by the sensation of the wind as this invisible force of nature in your sails propelling your little craft, and the autonomy, master of your own destiny kind of sense of, I don't know what the right word is. There is something very, almost spiritual about it. And I don't want to get too kind of weird on you, but it's something that is an essence of a sport that is unlike any other I've been involved with. So to come back to your question about the leadership and the culture, when New Zealand first challenged for the America's Cup, and that was in 1987 in Fremantle, so that campaign started in 1985. And what we did as an approach is we put together a campaign which was quite similar to the way that many sports operate, including rugby, in that you competed for your position on the top crew. So you had 2 or 3 people, for example, competing to be the mainsail trimmer. And the philosophy being that if you were the best in that competitive situation, you would get selected, and that's how we would get the best crew. So we use that approach, and it still exists, and it's modified a little in rugby, but other sports too, right? You've got somebody who's your first choice halfback, and you've got hopefully your person on the bench who's pushing them really hard, and they're selected from a competitive environment where you've got 7 or 8 or 9 halfbacks in the sport of rugby playing at a professional level. That didn't work as a successful model in sailing. We didn't win in 1987. And similarly, we took the same philosophy into 1992, and we didn't win there either. The person who turned that on his head was Sir Peter Blake. When he came into lead late in the piece, the 1992 challenge for the America's Cup off San Diego, for those of you who are old enough to remember NZL 20, the red boat and so on, Peter Blake instinctively recognised that the culture and the approach was wrong. It was set up by Sir Michael Fay, a very strong business, compete against one another, and the cream will rise to the top kind of mindset. Blakey threw that out the door and established Team New Zealand. And he was the first person to put team first in the name. Prior to that, we were known as New Zealand Challenge, and there was other teams from other countries, but the team ethos was something that he brought in right from the word go, because he instinctively knew that that was what worked for the sport of sailing for Kiwis. And he'd honed that kind of recipe over many years of trying to win the Round the World Yacht Race. Over 20 years, he won it on his 5th attempt. Right? So he took a long time to really crack the nut, if you like, in terms of the culture of a team that could work for New Zealand in this kind of sport. And he took that into the Team New Zealand environment, and that turned it on its head. And what we ended up doing is, of course, famously winning in San Diego in 1995 with a 5-0 victory with a boat called NZL 32 and Black Magic. That recipe and that ethos has sat in the culture and the DNA of Team New Zealand ever since. Even though we haven't always been successful, it still sits within there. And the leadership of Team New Zealand has that within their whakapapa as well. So Kevin Shoebridge, the Chief Operating Officer, he sailed around the world with Sir Peter Blake in 1985, 1986 on Lion New Zealand when they lost. He was a watch captain on board Steinlager 2, in the 1989-90 Whitbread when they won. We won. And so Shuby's a Blakey disciple. Grant Dalton was a watch captain on board Lion New Zealand under Sir Peter Blake in 85-86. He learned his craft and leadership. He's a very different leader than Peter Blake. But he still understands some of the essence that's needed with that team first ethos. And these guys have referred to it a little bit, and they're sort of, when you ask them what was the most amazing thing, both of them reflected on that sense of belonging, that sense of teammateship, that sense of the collective being more important than the individual success. So that's my explanation to your astute question as to how we've been able to be so successful in this environment where by all rights we should have no hope. But we've not only had hope, we've actually been dominant in the last 30 years.
Very cool. And I'm just mindful of the time, we are due to finish very shortly, but I just wanted to give you guys a chance to reflect on what you've heard in terms of what you've felt and experienced inside the team. You know, like it's an absolute privilege and pleasure to be hearing from you, you know, the inside oil, the inside view of what we saw from the outside. So yeah, just any reflections on being in there.
I think Mark just hit the nail on the head when he said, you know, the collective is bigger than the individual, and that's. I think that really is the main thing that I took back from Team New Zealand is that you kind of just realise that, you know, being part of something that's so big and you really are made to feel like you are part of it as well was just it's definitely a memory, you know, I'll never forget. And I think, you know, when I took the job and I was offered the job, you know, as always with what's going on, you're like, well, should I? But then I'm like, you know, this is something that'll live with me for the rest of my life. And it definitely will be. And even, you know, I've got a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and you know, even Team New Zealand is so inclusive of family. So like my little girl, my little boy were there, you know, when they're finishing, and we were in the Emirates Team base, and hopefully, you know, it's something that they'll never forget either. So it's kind of really special.
Yeah, we felt included as fans. Adam, any final reflections?
Yeah, like I mean, I think it's interesting. So with my work with canoe racing New Zealand, like we're going through a process now for Olympic selection. There's a lot of debriefs and pre-briefs around, you know, how we can create a good team. So Gordy and the coaches will often ask me about sort of the Team New Zealand environment. Can we draw on some stuff? And in the canoe racing scene, there can be a little bit of conflict between either the athletes or you know, some coaching decisions being made. And the question is, did you ever sort of see a lot of that conflict in Team New Zealand? And to be honest, the answer was no. Like, I mean, I think what really separated that was we truly felt that the Cup was New Zealand. So, I mean, there was this huge overarching major priority which was completely devoid from personal matters. So every time there was a potential conflict on the table between clashing ideas, the take-home message is whose idea will make the boat faster, because that's the key priority for the Cup, for the sake of the nation. So to have that just bigger overarching goal, which we genuinely felt ripple through the entire team, was pretty special. Yeah,
if I just add on a bit to that, I mean, from my experience of rowing and working in Olympic sports, is like there's always kind of like this feeling, and I don't want to use the word entitlement, but like the athletes are kind of like, you know, they're protected, they're amazing, and you can't, you know, they have to just train and rest. But like the sailors are just as equal as everyone else as the design team. And like an example would be that, you know, me and Adam, if we did 2 sessions a day, we could leave the gym in the morning and we'd get back in the afternoon, the sailors would clean the whole lot. You know, they'd hoovered the floors, polished the gym equipment, and you know, I think that's such a good culture, and it really shows that, you know, no one's better than anyone else in that whole environment, and I think that's so important.
Indeed. I can hear another book in there, Mark, in terms of leadership culture and collective leadership.
One other quick thing I'd add is you guys, humour is a huge part of the culture, and it's sort of self-deprecating humour as well. You take the piss out of each other and have a lot of fun with it, and so nobody's able to get too full of themselves, because if they try that, they get cut down pretty quickly. And it's a lot of fun. And when you guys talked about the things seem to finish, and you almost go through a bit of a grieving period afterwards, because you've been such a tight team, you've been involved in such an amazing thing together, and you've accomplished something, and then suddenly it's kind of finished. And so you look back on it and you actually think, wow, that was something pretty special. what a lot of fun it was too.
I was just recovering from a hangover for the first one, so I wasn't aware of that.
But it certainly was something incredibly special, and thank you so much for all the moments that you've provided for us, and it's been fantastic to hear about your insights today, and it's much appreciated that you've come back to reflect on it. And I hope you've enjoyed recalling the essence of a very, very special opportunity. So I'd like to call on Andy Kilding to come forward and just thank our panellists on our behalf.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Obviously the purpose of today was to bring 3 experts. You know, we're really lucky and fortunate at AUT to have the kind of skill set and experience and knowledge in the world of sailing. So I guess on behalf of AUT and everyone here, thank you very much for your sharing your insights and giving us a bit of a glimpse under the bonnet of Team Emirates. Obviously, the event captivated us all, certainly captivated me, and as Mike said, you know, not many of us probably sail, but for some reason the event does kind of pull you in, and it's great to learn a little bit more about the background and the legacy, the importance of successes and losses in future successes, and obviously the conditioning and science element, which is becoming obviously a big part of professional and Olympic sports these days. So, yeah, thanks very much for finding the time and effort to share with us today. We've got a small gift of appreciation, and this gift is not just about recognising what you've come and done today for us in terms of presenting, but just an acknowledgement of your contributions to Team Emirates, I guess. And you know, it is an important event for us as Kiwis. So we've got a Ponalu stone, which has been blessed. And obviously, as you're probably well aware, this is a pretty special stone. And hopefully, whenever you wear it and look at it, it is a recognition of what you've done and contributed to the successes of Team Emirates.
Thank you.
So here we go, I'll go in just in order.
So super, that wraps it up for today. Thank you very much.